and thanks for listening to the Business That Matters Spotlight. My name is Breck Lover. I'm a podcast moderator and producer, and I'm temporarily taking the reins on the Business That Matters Spotlight to get to know the host, Warren Coughlin, a little bit better. So, Warren, thanks very much for taking the time to speak about yourself with us today.
Oh, it's my pleasure. A little embarrassing, I suppose, but it'll be fun.
We'll try to make it through without embarrassing you too much. But let's get right into it. You're a business coach, you're a trainer, a speaker, a strategic planner. Why do you do all this? What drives you?
That's a great question to start with. I actually believe that entrepreneurship is one of the most powerful forces for positive social change. And so I want to help entrepreneurs. There's a great line in the play Rent that says the opposite of war is not peace, it is creation. And entrepreneurs they create opportunities, they create solutions to problems, they create wealth, they create jobs, they create experiences. And so to the extent that they are helping make the world a better place, they need to be armed with the skills to do it as well as they can. And, to kind of go way back, it's weird to have a bio that starts at birth, but in my case, it's relevant to the question. I was supposed to die at birth. I was the second human in history to live through a really weird congenital defect that gave my parents zero chance of me surviving, but they tried some experimental surgery, and it turned out that it worked. And when I discovered that somewhere in my teens, when they sort of let me know that, it kind of spurred something in me that I wanted to do something with this gift I wasn't supposed to have. And so I went through a lot of iterations. I thought I'd be going to politics, so I went into law. I thought I'd transformative power of art, became an actor and theater director, mold young minds by becoming a college professor. And then it was really entrepreneurship that it really started to sing to me, that I think that's such a powerful force for making the world a better place, that's where I wanted to dedicate myself. And so that's when I got into business coaching. It was like, this is where I can have a really big impact and help people do things in a good way. Because one of the things is, like, people who want to do good, particularly through the business, they sometimes don't spend as much time working on their skills. They spend a lot of time thinking about their values and working with their people and working with their customers, but not the core business skills. And so if we can help take an entrepreneur who really wants to make the world a better place and make them more successful, then guess what? They become a role model for everyone else. Then other people who want to make the world a better place say, hey, that's possible. I can do that too. And so then it inspires them to do things that way. So there's a real, kind of a spillover effect. That's the theory anyway.
The theory. I think it is important to know, you've mentioned this once or twice already, you are values driven. Where do your values come from? Who taught you?
I hesitate just because that's, the obvious answer is to say my parents and that kind of thing, right? But it was a lot of different experiences. I moved a number of times. My parents obviously had a very strong influence on those values. But a lot of things, just my own experiences from when, I was sick as a kid, and then I lost my hair when I was 12 years old. I spent a lot of time with a lot of different people and all the different experiences that I had. I've traveled a lot. I've been through Southeast Asia, Northern Africa, Europe. And I started to see like some really common threads to what makes people happy, to what makes the world a better place, to things that are distracting from it. I spent a lot of time reading ancient wisdom and philosophy and, like the Stoics and all the way up to modern stuff like Martin Seligman and the positive psychology movement. And I got influence from a lot of different places.
That's interesting.
And I was very, very fortunate. And, one of the weird things probably, I think a lot of my values were formed in high school. I was very fortunate. The teachers in our high school actually said we were the most unusual group to come through the school in like a generation. And it was just very odd. Like we had, the groups like you see in other schools, but everybody got along. Like there were no hard cliques. There was no conflict. And there was our school actually had a lot of conversation about values and ethics and morality. And there was just this we could see that when we went to a party where there were kids from other schools, that we were just a little bit different. And like we really cared for each other and we supported each other. And even someone who was from a different, quote, clique, we'd still care for them and try to support them if something was going on. And that was just sort of a natural thing for our community for whatever reason. I don't know where that came from, but I feel really fortunate that I was exposed to that because it really did sort of solidify for me things that I thought about right and wrong, And one other thing, just about personal, I remember when I was the president of our high school student council, and the city of I lived out west at the time. The city of Edmonton was going to annex the city of St. Albert, where I lived, and there was a lot of opposition to that. And when it was announced, I joined a citizens committee. I was invited to participate as a youth representative on a mayor's sort of committee to help do this. I got to meet the premier of Alberta, and I started to see really, like, at a fairly young age that, yeah, you can make a difference just by taking action, like standing up, right? And standing for something and coordinating with other people who stand for the same things. You can actually have a voice, and you can influence others, and you can be respected for doing that. So all those kinds of things were informed the values. And then once I started business coaching, as I talked to entrepreneurs, I started to really see how they, underneath it all, like the really great entrepreneurs that I worked with, I found that they really cared. They cared about their people. They cared about the difference they made. They cared about their product and service in a way that I didn't see the same thing in the corporate environment. Because their business was such an extension of who they are, that their own values just naturally got injected into it. So I thought, that's really, we can't teach people business skills without helping them align with their values, or they're just not going to be happy.
All that said, I think that it's safe to say that we live in times that are maybe a little angrier than they used to be. I think the pandemic changed a lot of people's perspectives and made people a little bit more sour. You find it's hard to hold on to those values, that purpose, when we live in an angrier world?
I actually think the anger started before the pandemic. It was just an accelerant.
That's
but I think that's a fair comment, that there is sort of a fragmentation and there's a divisiveness. But I think in point of fact, that's why the values orientation is more important. People don't know where to look to for kind of values-based leadership, because religious institutions have less sway than they used to. The political environment just doesn't seem to inspire people towards those kinds of conversations. Schools are shy about talking about these kind of things. So where do people actually go to find guidance? And so I actually think entrepreneurial leaders and organizations that are driven by leaders provide a great antidote to that anger out there, because we're a group, whatever else is going out there, we care about these things. And this is the difference we're going to try to make. And this is how we're going to serve people. And then people take those things into their personal lives. And if people are overt about those, like I've got clients, we have very open conversations about this stuff. And I've had employees who I want to hear more about this. I want to have more of those kind of conversations. And they wind up taking it into their personal lives. So I actually think the more there are entrepreneurial environments doing this stuff, the more we act as a counterweight to some of those cultural influences.
I like the fact that you use the word antidote there. That's telling, I think. What kind of people do you like to surround yourself with?
Again, I hesitate because these are good questions, but they're deeper than maybe it sounds like. Because I'm an actor, theater director. I have interest in politics and philosophy. I'm a business person, so I'm quite eclectic, and so the people I like to surround myself are similar. I like people with different opinions. Like I've got friends who are very different from me politically, but we have wonderful conversations and learn a lot from each other. So I like people who are open-minded, who have strong opinions, loosely held, who are fun, have senses of humor, who care about other human beings. And, even if their values are different than mine, but they're principle driven. Because then you got something to talk about, and less easily influenced by the masses. There's a fellow I follow who I quite respect, and he says, if there's another group of people who have a different opinion than you, and all you can say about them is they are bad or stupid, then you have been co-opted by somebody else's narrative, and think it's your own opinion.
That's pretty insightful. Now, there's respect, but inspire. Who inspires you?
Entrepreneurs, they do. Like people, every day I meet people who are just doing really interesting things, and they're putting themselves on the line, and they're caring for other people, and they're taking risks, and they're working long hours, and they really inspire me. Great thinkers inspire me, like people who have put a lot of thought into whatever issue. There's some discipline behind what they do. My daughter inspires me. I've got some friends who inspire me because they're just models of things that I respect about personal integrity and personal responsibility and kindness and compassion and discipline and wanting to work hard and succeed.
Now, the business that matters spotlight. We're going into season 2 here. You've been in the podcast game for a little bit. What value do you take from these podcasts? If somebody else wanted to start their own, what kind of advice would you give them?
Be true to yourself. I think there's a lot of, do a podcast so you can market yourself better. And I'm not opposed to that. I mean, I'm doing it because it helps market who I am as well. But in that, there can, you know what I'm saying? You can be a little bit manipulative in your marketing, but I think if you're actually, the more you have a voice that you actually want to communicate something, like so far our conversation has been mostly about the values piece, but in point of fact, in the podcast, what I'm trying to draw out is for people who want to make a difference, that there are actually business disciplines, and there's decision-making skills that you need to develop. There's business approaches and structures and things like that if you really want to have a life of fulfillment, like I use the word fulfillment rather than happiness. Like happiness is kind of flighty. It's like, oh, I'm happy today. Whereas fulfillment, you can be grinding away at something and you wouldn't say in that moment you're happy, but you get that sense of this matters. I'm really feeling good about myself. And so if you want that kind of fulfillment, you need to have the skills that give you the confidence that you're going to be able to handle whatever comes at you. I think one of the mistakes that people make is not accepting that challenge and suffering is part of the journey. And when you think that you make suffering worse, when you think that it's wrong, that you're experiencing some pain, when you kind of go, it shouldn't be this way, it actually makes it harder on yourself. You're digging in your heels. Whereas when you can say, no, look, business is hard. If it was easy, everybody would be, everybody would be rich and having their own business. Like being an entrepreneur is hard, and that's part of the fun. Like that it is. It's, being able to rise above something. The purpose in life is not to avoid struggle. It's to choose the right struggle. And entrepreneurs, I think, choose the right struggles. And so I sort of diverge there. So in terms of doing a podcast, if you are like any marketing, I think it should be authentic. And a platform like this, you should be trying to serve your audience, not serve yourself. You should be trying to serve the guests who are coming on the podcast, not yourself. As in this is my approach in sales too. The only reason I succeed in sales, I had a conversation with a client once about this. I was teaching her some sales skills, and I said, "Remember our sales call?" She goes, "What sales call?" I said, "Well, remember when we first met?" She goes, "That was a sales call?" I said, "Well, yeah." She goes, "I thought you were just there to help me." I said, "I was. And then at the end of it, you wanted me to keep helping you." He said, "Oh, you." But it was like, that's, I think, the approach to take, right? When people know that you are there to help them and that you actually care about what you're talking about, then they're going to be more interested in what you have to say, as long as what you're saying has some coherence and some logic to it, and the people you're inviting have things that are interesting that people want to learn from and listen to. And so those are the conversations we want to, on the podcast that I have. We get into the conversations not just about the values, but like, what are the challenges you make? How did you make decisions around this stuff? What are you struggling with right now? What entrepreneurial skills are you lacking in right now, despite your level of success? And what I have found is people, given the opportunity to have those conversations, are incredibly open and generous and willing to share because they understand that the podcast is about helping other people as well. And they want to do that, which is part of that entrepreneurial spirit. So that would be my approach to it. And that's what I love to do when I'm doing. I mean, when I'm having conversations with entrepreneurs who've had trials, struggles and challenges and successes, it's fun. Like they're great conversations.
Now, you mentioned your audience a few times, satisfying your audience and keeping them in mind as you progress forward. Who do you think your audience is? Who are you speaking to?
I hope I'm speaking to other entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs. I mean, primarily because we get into the nitty gritty about what's going on in the business. I think if you're not in business, some of that may go by you. So it's probably not all, it may not resonate if we're talking about, what are your recruitment practices, or how do you, what did you do to manage your finances? How did you raise capital? When we get into some of those kinds of questions, or when the market shifted, when you pivoted during COVID, and how did you deal with that? And some of the, like I had a person on last year, we get into some of the like real hard decision-making stuff. So he's in fashion, but he wants to do ethical fashion. But there's two competing sort of objectives. One would be the organic and one to be local. As it happens, there are no local organic farmers for the product he uses. So he has to choose between local or organic, which leaves him vulnerable to criticism on one of those two sources from people who think you have to be pure to be able to put yourself out there as ethical. Right. And so we get into like meaty conversations like that. How do you make that decision? What are the criteria? How do you handle the criticism that comes up? So if you're not in business, you're not in that field where you've had to take a couple of those shots to the head from people or have to make those hard decisions, it's probably not going to resonate as much unless you're someone who's about to embark on it. You want to get a bit of a sense of what it's going to be like as you go down that path. So it's either like people who are entrepreneurs, who've been entrepreneurs for a while, who like to hear other people's experiences, or people who are going down that path. Now, it could also, this isn't, quote, target market, but if you're in a relationship with an entrepreneur and want to understand some of their experiences, it can probably help there too.
Yeah, that could. Now, as I mentioned, we're in the season 2 of the Business That Matters Spotlight. What can we expect from this season? What can we see moving forward?
I'm hoping to expand a little bit. So the first season was really just focusing on the entrepreneurs, right? Like it was just really giving a spotlight to them. So I want to continue to do that. I want to invite really interesting entrepreneurs who are trying to make the world a better place in some way, whether that's just providing a great place to work, or the product they use, or using green systems, or it doesn't have to be green stuff. I have a client who she makes clothing, designs fashion for what she calls seated clientele, people who are in wheelchairs. And there's really unique fashion challenges like you and I wouldn't even think of, right? Like when you put on a suit jacket, when you're in a wheelchair, you're sitting on the back of the jacket all the time. So she cuts them shorter so that they're way more comfortable, So it can be about the product itself, about your processes. It can be about just how you want to communicate ethically, about the kind of environment you want to deal with your people. But I also want to bring in experts, who can give some additional advice to those people, who've had experiences. So it could be people who are experts in finance or raising capital, or HR experts, or because, I've been doing this for since 2002, 2001. And so I know a reasonable amount, but I'm a generalist. And so there are people who have deeper expertise than me in particular areas. So I want to bring in that knowledge to help the audience even more.
And finally, and I don't want you to give away your secret recipe by any means, but what is that one little nugget of truth that you think that every entrepreneur should know?
Can you elaborate a little bit more? Because that could go down a philosophical route or a skills route.
What's your starting point with your clients? What do you want them to know first and foremost as soon as you get into a conversation?
What do they want? That's the starting point. It's actually the starting point behind almost any problem, right? If you want to solve problems without becoming a victim, which is really easy to do. Like when you've been an entrepreneur and you've been beat up a few times, it's really easy to feel sorry for yourself or to feel hard done by, or all those kinds of things. And you can wind up talking about all the challenges out there, but the starting point is, what do you want? Once you're clear on what you want, then you can start crafting solutions. But if you're vague about what you want, it's that old, if you don't know where you want, anywhere will get you there. Any path will take you there. You need to have a destination, and the destination will inform the solutions. And so I'd say that as a starting point, that's the main thing. From a what's the secret sauce for entrepreneurs? Like, what do I think entrepreneurs need to really develop? There's 3 foundations behind every business. And if they can get these 3 foundations in place, then everything else sort of fits on top of that. And those 3 foundations, I use the metaphor of a sports team. You can't win if you don't know how to keep score. You can't win if you don't have a winning team. And you can't win if you don't have a winning game plan. So what does that mean practically? You got to know your numbers. Too many entrepreneurs don't know their numbers, and it scares them. But when you learn what the numbers are, it's actually not that hard. But you just need to understand what they're telling you to inform your decisions. You've got to have a high performance culture. There's a lot of people who are building what I call nice cultures, which is not the same as a high performance culture. A nice culture is where you're always giving to your team and making them feel appreciated and valued, which is an important element of it. But a high performance culture is one where there are reciprocal expectations, where people want to play with high performers like to play with other high performers. So I just had a conversation last week with a client. We were talking about this, and it was like a high performance environment should be very uncomfortable for a mediocre player. That's a hard thing for some people to get their heads around. And then the last piece about having a winning game plan. If you're always playing whack-a-mole, just reacting to things that are coming up, you're always going to be in a reactive decision-making mode. But when you can learn to actually put a game plan together and do that every 90 days and then execute on that plan, the growth you will achieve over a 1 and 2 year period will blow you away. A lot of people will say they have 5 years experience, but what they really have is 1 year of experience 5 times, rather than actually putting in defined changes and executable plans every 90 days. So if you do those 3, because here's where it works. You put a plan together, you execute on the plan. Who's going to execute on it? The people. So you got to have really good people who can execute on it. You want to know if your plan worked. How are you going to know if it works? You got to know your numbers. So those are the 3 starting points. That's, if you want to call it, the secret sauce. Because a lot of people come into business coaching or consulting or something, and they sort of do random off-the-shelf problems. Like, I want you to help me with this thing. I want you to help me with this thing. But if they haven't got the foundations together, it's always going to bump up against something eventually. But if you have the foundations in place, then it's sort of like when you see a condominium. There's a hole in the ground for like 6 months, and then all of a sudden it's up 6 stories. It's because they spent all the time to make sure the foundation is really solid. And once they know the foundation is solid, boom, then we can grow fast.
Well, I can't think of a better way to end it, and that's sage advice. Warren, thank you. I really enjoyed our conversation today. I want to thank you for your time. I appreciate you opening up to our audience as well. I'm sure they really enjoyed it too.
Well, me too. Thanks for doing this.